Welcome to the Synthesis of Yoga, the book that changed my life. We are going through the part 1, the Yoga of Divine Works, second chapter, Self-Consecration. And this is episode number 47. And in our previous episode, we have covered the need for an all-inclusive concentration. And that too upon the 2 points of leverage. One is the higher mind that is above, a divine mind that is above, which is the source of our normal rational intelligence. The second center is deep in the heart, the soul within, the evolving psychic being. These two are the leverage points by which we can lift ourselves up into the divine nature, which otherwise is impossible with our limited human knowledge and will of the rational intelligence. So with that, now we are moving on to this episode. We are starting with paragraph number 19. And in the description, you will find the link to this chapter, and I will highly encourage you to travel along with me by reading these lines, because Sri Aurobindo's words and its rhythm and force has its own magical power of transformation. That had been always my personal experience, and doing this podcast for me is always so enriching because I'm reading his lines, diving deeper, every time getting new meanings, new depth of understanding. So just keep that text with you so that we travel together. But on that which as yet we know not, how shall we concentrate? So on one hand, we need an all-inclusive concentration. How the divine appears, or what are the qualities? How do we connect to the divine whom we do not know yet? And yet, we cannot know the divine unless we have achieved this concentration of our being upon him. So without concentrating, we cannot know, and without knowing, how do we concentrate? Which one? And that's a question that he's raising in this paragraph. A concentration which culminates in a living realization and a constant sense of the presence of the One in ourselves and in all of which we are aware is what we mean in yoga by knowledge and the effort after knowledge. So a concentration which culminates in a living realization. When you have a living realization, not an intellectual conception, not a mental understanding, but a living realization that is moment to moment, it's a breathing reality. And the constant sense of the presence of the One, the presence, the One who is all permeating and all exceeding, that and its presence. These are the characteristics, and the presence of the One in ourselves and in all of which we are aware. So this all-permeating One in ourselves, as well as this entire world that we experience, is what we mean in yoga by knowledge and the effort after knowledge. So in order to concentrate, we need knowledge of the One upon whom we concentrate. And what is that knowledge? It is a living realization and the presence of the One in ourselves and all that which we are aware. So that's the type of knowledge that we need to find. The effort to know is towards this aspect of having that living realization, having the sense of the presence of the One in ourselves and all around. It is not enough to devote ourselves by the reading of scriptures or by the stress of philosophic reasoning to an intellectual understanding of the divine. So we can have an intellectual understanding through scriptures, through philosophy, but that is not enough. For at the end of our long mental labor, we might know all that has been said of the eternal, possess all that can be thought about the infinite, and yet we might not know him at all. So clearly, even if we read and get a rich conception, philosophical conception about everything that has been said about the divine, doesn't mean that we actually know the divine. It's like the Himalayas. We can have a map of the Himalaya, know all the nooks and corners and pathways and peaks. Doesn't mean that we know Himalaya. All that we know is a mental map. So when we read the scriptures, when we read or when we do the philosophical reasoning and get to know everything about that has been said about the divine, what we get is a mental representation, a map, not an experience of the divine. So it is not enough to devote ourselves by the reading of scriptures. He's saying it's not enough. It's important to read and know so that the mind has a map. Just like when we go to Himalayas, we should have a map to know where we are going, what is the path we are taking. All that is very good, but that is not experience. Experience is when you are actually on the terrain. So it is not enough to devote ourselves by the reading of scriptures or by the stress of philosophic reasoning to an intellectual understanding of the divine. For at the end of our long mental labor, we might know all that has been said of the eternal, possess all that can be thought about the infinite, and yet we might not know him at all. This intellectual preparation can indeed be the first stage of a powerful yoga. One can have an intellectual preparation, and that can be indeed the first stage of a powerful yoga. But it is not indispensable. It is not a step which all need or can be called upon to take. So among all the sadhaks who seek the divine, not everyone is called upon to have a deep, detailed, intellectual understanding of the divine. It is not indispensable for everyone. But for those who have a powerful yoga, it is very helpful to have that. So this intellectual preparation can indeed be the first stage in a powerful yoga. But it is not indispensable. It is not a step which all need or can be called upon to take. Yoga would be impossible, except for a very few, if the intellectual figure of knowledge arrived at by the speculative or meditative reason where its indispensable condition or a binding preliminary. If this was a condition to have an intellectual figure of knowledge of the divine through meditative reason or speculative reason, if it was indispensable condition or a binding preliminary, then yoga will be impossible for most, except for a few who are having that intellectual apparatus well developed enough to have that profound conception of the divine as an intellectual, mental figure. So it is not indispensable and not a binding preliminary. That is a preparatory stage required for everyone. It is not at all. All that the light from above asks of us that it may begin its work is a call from the soul and a sufficient point of support in the mind. So we have already covered the idea of a divine mind above and light above. All that is above, that luminous source is asking from the sadhak is only these two things: a call of the soul and a point of support in the mind. That's all what is required. Remember, in the previous episode, we had seen that the two major centers or leverage points, one is the soul within, and the other is this divine mind above, divine source above, of which this light above is asking. One is to have the call in the soul. The soul is ready and ripe to turn to seek the divine. It's ready. It has matured over evolution. And second is a point of contact in the mind, a support in the mind, because we live in the outer being, in the mind, and in that space there should be some support in the mind. So all that the light from above asks of us, that it may begin its work. For it to begin, what we need is a call from the soul and a sufficient point of support in the mind. So our human mind, which is turned outward and absorbed in the outer life, if it has a contact, a point, sufficient point of support, if there is a little readiness in the mind, and the soul deep within is calling that light above, then that is sufficient to start. So this sufficient point of support in the mind is not a detailed intellectual understanding. That is not what is meant by a sufficient point of support in the mind. This support can be reached through an insistent idea of the divine in the thought, a corresponding will in the dynamic parts, an aspiration, a faith, a need in the heart. This is how the support can be cultivated. This is something that our conscious mind needs to work on, to cultivate that support. And there are three layers where this support is to be cultivated. One is an insistent idea of the divine. So we have thought. Thoughts are happening all the time. If there is an idea of the divine in our thoughts, that is one way we are beginning that seeding. Other is a corresponding will in the dynamic parts. Our will, the dynamic creative force in us, that will has a corresponding will to this idea of the divine in thought. And then third is an aspiration, a faith, a need in the heart of emotions. If there is an emotional turning, if there is a will that is supporting, if there is an idea in thought, these three together provides that sufficient support in our being, outer being, so that the journey can begin. So this support can be reached through an insistent idea of the divine in the thought, a corresponding will in the dynamic parts, an aspiration, a faith, a need in the heart. So for example, when people take up japa, that is, you're not intellectually, philosophically analyzing and exploring the divine existence. Instead, you're just taking a mantra, a name, and dwelling on it. It is held in thought. It could be as simple as that. When that is supported with the emotion, and when that is supported with an active will in our inner nature, that is sufficient to provide the support. So, an insistent idea of the divine in the thought, a corresponding will in the dynamic parts, an aspiration, a faith, a need in the heart, a faith that this knowledge is not yet come, but there is a deep certitude. This is what is required. And an aspiration. Aspiration is that turn towards the divine. Any one of these may lead or predominate if all cannot move in unison or in equal rhythm. So, out of these three, any one of them may lead. You may lead with the mind, or you may lead with the will, or you may lead with the heart. One of them dominate. If all cannot move in unison or in equal rhythm, if they cannot come together with an equal strength, equal rhythm, any one of them may predominate, others will provide support, and that is perfectly fine. The idea may be and must in the beginning be inadequate, naturally. So, when we begin, our conception about the divine is generally vague and inadequate, and that's okay. So, the idea may be and must be in the beginning be inadequate. The aspiration may be narrow and imperfect. The faith poorly illumined, or even as not surely founded on the rock of knowledge, fluctuating, uncertain, easily diminished. Often, even it may be extinguished and need to be lit again with difficulty, like a torch in a windy pass. So that flickering aspiration, fluctuating, uncertain, may get extinguished but can be rekindled again and again and again and again, so that it grows in strength, like a torch in a windy pass. Beautiful image. So, it could be an inadequate idea, just a beginning of its formation is sufficient. An aspiration may be again imperfect and narrow, and faith poorly illumined. Faith starts with its intuitive conviction, this is the thing to be done. And that gets progressively illumined when the knowledge reveals itself and validates the faith. That's why faith poorly illumined, or even as not surely founded upon the rock of knowledge. When the faith and knowledge come together, there is a rock of knowledge upon which the faith itself is stable, solid. And this faith may be fluctuating, uncertain, easily diminished if it is not having such a rock. Often, even it may be extinguished and need to be lit again with difficulty, like a torch in a windy pass. So we all go through these early stages of our groping, searching for the divine, where there is periodic rising of the aspiration, and we again fall back into the routine, conventional life. And once again, when we come in touch with someone or some wave of that aspiration, inspiration come again through someone or something, again we have that effort that is rekindled. And progressively the mind is developing its conception about the divine. And we can also turn our actions gradually gravitating towards knowing the divine and moving towards committing ourselves to that grand adventure. But if once there is a resolute self-consecration from deep within, if there is an awakening to the soul's call, these inadequate things can be sufficient can be a sufficient instrument for the divine purpose. So the key thing is this. If once there is a resolute self-consecration from deep within, that is, if there is an awakening to the soul's call, so there is deep within us our emerging psychic being, and it is calling. It is calling the divine to pour down and lift the whole instrumental nature. If that call is there, and if this self-consecration has been done, a resolute self-consecration from deep within, if this is there, awakening to the soul's call, if this is there, then these inadequate things can be a sufficient instrument for the divine purpose. So the inadequacy of your intellectual conception really doesn't matter. The inadequacy of your heart's faith and its yearning, even if it is flickering, it is all right. As long as the soul has turned, the soul's calling is there, and there is that self-consecration from deep within. The soul has consecrated to that pursuit. But if once there is a resolute self-consecration from deep within, if there is an awakening to the soul's call, outer being awakening to the soul's call, these inadequate things can be sufficient instrument for the divine purpose. Therefore, the wise have always been unwilling to limit man's avenues towards God. Therefore, the wise have always been unwilling to limit man's avenues towards God. They would not shut against his entry even the narrowest portal, the lowest and darkest postern, the humblest wicket gate. So, even through a tiniest doorway, you can still enter. When there is the awakening to the soul's call, a little opening in the outer being, in the mind, in the emotions, that is enough support. When there is this awakening to the soul's calling. So the wise have never limited, saying that you need to have a complete, detailed mental understanding before you start off, or your whole emotional being has to completely turn towards the divine. None of that. A little sufficient support is enough to start. But the key factor is there is the awakening to the call of the soul. Therefore, the wise have always been unwilling to limit man's avenues towards God. They would not shut against his entry even the narrowest portal, the lowest and darkest postern, the humblest wicket gate. Any name, any form, any symbol, any offering has been held to be sufficient if there is the consecration along with it. For the divine knows himself in the heart of the seeker and accepts the sacrifice. That's the incredible deep secret that we have to discover. Deep within us, divine is seated, who receives whatsoever be the offering we make, however clumsy may be our offering, however limited may be our offering. Any name, any form, any symbol, any offering has been held to be sufficient. In the Gita, we read a flower, a leaf, a glass of water. If it is offered, it comes to me, I receive. But the condition here is if there is the consecration along with it. that choice. So it is not so much the outer forms of your practice that matters, but that inner choice, the consecrated offering. Whether it is any form, any name, any symbol, any offering has been held to be sufficient if there is the consecration along with it. Why it is happening? Because for the divine knows himself in the heart of the seeker and accepts the sacrifice. Because the divine is already seated within, who knows you. All that you're capable, all that you're meant to be, your future course of evolution, everything is already there seated within you. The divine in you knows. Because we live in the outer being and we are lost in the confusions of the world and groping and searching, that outer being doesn't know what your possibilities are. And it is from that ignorant outer nature we make our initial clumsy attempts to seek the divine and make the offering. But whatsoever be that offering, when there is that sincere consecration, the sacrifice is received by the divine who knows you exactly. You cannot really fool the divine by faking an outer appearance, because divine is already seated and knows you exactly much better than you know yourself. So your expression, the way you give yourself, may be clumsy like a baby who is stumbling and walking towards. It is perfectly all right. Your intellectual conception may be inadequate. It's all right. Your heart's emotion may be flickering, going up and down. That little flame may be extinguished very easily. But when there is this soul's call and a consecration to that, then no matter how inadequate your offering is, the divine knows you and accepts the sacrifice. What a beautiful picture, and what a relief it is to know this, that our stumblings, our inadequacies, our limitations, nothing truly matters, because the divine knows. Divine has chosen you for this adventure. So even if your practices are very narrow, limited, and fluctuating, it's all right. If there is the consecration, that choice, this is my future, this is my path, this is where I want to devote myself to, this is what I want to commit to. There is this yearning arising from the deepest soul. When we are awakened to the soul's call, everything works. So any name, any form, any symbol, any offering has been held to be sufficient if there is the consecration along with it. For the divine knows himself in the heart of the seeker and accepts the sacrifice. What a reassuring, beautiful statement, what a picture it is, so assuring. It gives us tremendous freedom to know that divine is seated in the depth and knows you more than you know yourself. But still, the greater and wider, the moving idea force behind the consecration, the better for the seeker. The moving idea force behind the consecration. What is that commitment that you're making? What is the choice that you're making? What is the moving idea force behind it? If it is greater and wider, better it is for the seeker. His attainment is likely to be fuller and more ample. A richer, fuller attainment is possible when your idea force behind it itself is rich and wide and many-faceted. If we are to attempt an integral yoga, it will be as well to start with an idea of the divine that it is itself integral. So since we are into integral yoga, the very idea of the divine itself, when it is integral, that is a better way to start off. If we are to attempt an integral yoga, it will be as well to start with an idea of the divine that is itself integral. And what is integral idea of the divine? There should be an aspiration in the heart wide enough for a realization without any narrow limits. So before we getting into the integral idea about the divine, there's another condition that he's bringing in. There should be an aspiration in the heart wide enough for a realization without any narrow limits. So if our conception is narrow and limited, that can limit the realization. What we require is a wide enough aspiration in the heart that is sufficient for a realization without any narrow limits. Not only should we avoid a sectarian religious outlook, but also all one-sided philosophical conceptions which try to shut up the ineffable in a restricting mental formula. So there are many schools of philosophy that chooses one aspect of the divine and say, that's it, everything else is false. Reject everything else. That is not acceptable to an integral approach towards the divine. Neither a sectarian religious outlook nor a one-sided philosophical conception that says divine is only this, nothing else. So not only should we avoid a sectarian religious outlook, but also all one-sided philosophical conceptions which try to shut up the ineffable in a restricting mental formula. Classic example is insistence that divine is nothing but the timeless, formless, empty existence. That's the only form philosophically defined and acceptable. Then you're limiting yourself to the rich variety of the possibilities of divine realization. Not only should we avoid sectarian religious outlook, but also all one-sided philosophical conceptions which try to shut up the ineffable in a restricting mental formula. The dynamic conception or impelling sense with which our yoga can best set out would be naturally the idea, the sense of a conscious, all-embracing but all-exceeding infinite. That's the rough, sketchy notion of the idea or the sense of a conscious, all-embracing and all-exceeding infinite. So the divine is conscious of you and the entire world and everything happening in the world. So it's conscious. It is all-embracing the material world, the entire universe, and yet it is all-exceeding. It exceeds the entire universe. So it is covering the entire spectrum. A conscious, all-embracing, but all-exceeding infinite. That is the basic starting point of the notion, an integral notion of the divine. Our outlook must be to a free, all-powerful, perfect, and blissful one. Particularly the dimension of bliss. The divine is conceived as a blissful one. It's not just all-exceeding, all-pervasive, all-embracing and conscious. It is blissful one. And oneness in which all beings move and live and through which all can meet and become one. So there is this oneness in which the multiplicity exists. And it is in that oneness everything exists. All beings move and live in that oneness, and through which all can meet and become one. The very foundation for our oneness is this all permeating, conscious, all embracing, all exceeding infinite, who is not only exceeding but also is immanent in everything, and it's blissful, in whom we exist, move, and meet each other and become one, because it is one that is behind all things. This eternal will be at once personal and impersonal in his self-revelation and touch upon the soul. This had been a point of contention across various religious schools and philosophical schools. Some would insist that this is impersonal, some would insist that this is personal. An integral conception, it is at once personal and impersonal, and it can reveal to you whatsoever be the way you approach. The eternal will be at once personal and impersonal in his self-revelation and touch upon the soul. Each soul is approaching the divine in its own unique way, and the divine pours according to the way we approach. It can come as personal divine, it can come as impersonal divine. All these are possibilities within the divine infinity. He is personal because he is the conscious divine. The divinity permeating all things is conscious. It's conscious of you and conscious of everything else. Therefore, it can become personal to you. He is personal because he is the conscious divine, the infinite person who casts some broken reflection of himself in the myriad divine and undivine personalities of the universe. So there is this infinite person who is behind all these myriad personalities we see in the universe. And these personalities are all, what he is saying, a broken reflection of himself. So this infinite person is casting this tiny little reflection, like the sun is scattered in a lake. Each personality is a tiny little reflection of that infinite person. So the infinite person who casts some broken reflection of himself in the myriad divine and undivine personalities of the universe, including the undivine personalities that we classify in our approach of our living. Even that too is a reflection, a broken reflection of the divine in these personalities of the universe. He is impersonal because he appears to us as an infinite existence, consciousness, and ananda. And because he is the found, base, and constituent of all existence and all energies, the very material of our being, and mind and life and body, our spirit and our matter. Infinite existence, consciousness, and ananda. There is this infinity of it. It cannot be contained, it cannot be limited. Therefore, we experience it as impersonal. It transcends all our conception, which try to delimit the divine into some boundaries. It won't, because it is infinite. Therefore, we end up having this notion of the impersonality of it. He is impersonal because he appears to us as an infinite existence, consciousness, and Ananda. Sat, Chit, Ananda. Our notion about personality is usually cast in the anthropomorphic form with some human defined form. These are our clumsy, limited way of the mind trying to conceive that which cannot be conceived in such limited forms. So with all the face and eyes and nose and human-like forms, this is a typical conception that we come up with of the divine, to have a personal relationship. But the divine exceeds all this, and therefore, when it exceeds all this, we tend to see it as impersonal, because we have this need for this limited being to come to us and reveal to us as that personal little form. But the divine exceeds all that, therefore we experience it as impersonal. Impersonal, an infinite existence, consciousness, and ananda. And because he is the found, base, and constituent of all existences and all energies, so it is really the source and the foundation, constituent of all existence and all energies, the very material of our being and mind and life and body, our spirit and our matter, including our material existence, exist in that. It is the very substance of it at the deepest source level. The thought concentrating on him must not merely understand in an intellectual form that he exists or conceive of him as an abstraction, a logical necessity. It must become a seeing thought, able to meet him here as the inhabitant in all, realize him in ourselves, watch and take hold on the movement of his forces. So it's not enough to have an intellectual conception as a logical necessity that such an entity should be there. These days we see that people proving that God exists and I can prove it mathematically. There is a logical necessity for such an entity. But these are still an intellectual conception. What is required is a seeing thought. You can have a thought without having the vision of what the thought contains. A seeing thought is when the thought is infused or thought is arising from that vision. Thought and vision goes together. So it must become a seeing thought, able to meet him here as the inhabitant of all. We can see the Ishavasya Upanishad saying, Ishavasyam idam sarvam yat kincha jagatyam jagat. Inhabiting all things, even the tiniest of tiny. It is for the habitation of the Lord. So able to meet him here as the inhabitant in all, realize him in ourselves, watch and take hold of the movement of his forces. So not only we see and know as the inhabitant in all things as well as in ourselves, and observe and note the force. Take hold of the movement of his forces. When the divine is marshalling his rays, releasing his forces through us, to know this is coming from that deepest source, and therefore I gladly surrender to it. So the thought concentrating on him must not merely understand in an intellectual form that he exists, or conceive him as an abstraction, a logical necessity. It must become a seeing thought, able to meet him here as the inhabitant in all, realize him in ourselves, watch and take hold of the movement of his forces. He is the one existence. He is the original and universal delight that constitutes all things and exceeds them. He is the one infinite consciousness that composes all consciousnesses and informs all their movements. He is the one illimitable being who sustains all action and experience. His will guides the evolution of things towards their yet unrealized but inevitable aim and plenitude. You see the richness of that integral conception. He is the one existence. He is the original and universal delight, Ananda dimension, that constitutes all things and exceeds them. Then he is the one infinite consciousness that composes all consciousnesses. What appears in the universe as multitude of beings and their isolated individualized consciousness, all these are composed by that infinite consciousness and informs their movements. He is the one illimitable being. Illimitable being. Our individual being is a tiny, tiny drop, a little window, existing in that infinite being who sustains all action and experience. Sustains all action and experience. His will guides the evolution of things. In the material world, there is an evolution taking place, and it is the will of this infinite being, infinite consciousness, infinite delight, infinite existence that is driving the evolution of things towards their yet unrealized but inevitable aim and plenitude. So the whole evolution that is unfolding on earth is driven by that, towards its aim and plenitude. As we have already seen, Sri Aurobindo has already explained, the yoga of nature is to reveal the divinity in this evolving material world. So there is a plenitude that is being driven towards to reveal the infinity in the finite, the splendors of the divine in the material existence. It is towards that. This whole evolution is gradually moving, and it is moved by this infinite being. To him, the heart can consecrate itself. It is to this being, this existence, this delight, this consciousness, to whom the heart can consecrate itself. Approach him as the supreme beloved. Beat and move in him as in a universal sweetness of love and a living sea of delight. You see, it is not an abstraction that we are bringing into our conception, but something that is very vivid, someone in whom we exist. Approach him as a supreme beloved. Beat and move in him as in a universal sweetness of love. To know ourselves as immersed in that ocean of love and held in that love. And a living sea of delight. Love and delight are the very essence of that divine existence. And we are held in that, but we are disconnected because we are living in our tiny little surface self and its tiny, narrow ego personality, locked up in that misery. That's why we cannot experience this living sea of delight, sweetness of love, universal love. So to him the heart can consecrate itself. So to whom are we consecrating? It is to this divinity. This is the integral conception that we need to hold in our heart. Not an abstraction, not a one-sided philosophical transcendent formula, but this living reality that is permeating all things and exceeding all things. The one being who is infinite consciousness, infinite bliss, infinite existence. To him the heart can consecrate itself. Approach him as the supreme beloved. Beat and move in him as in a universal sweetness of love and a living sea of delight. For his is the secret joy that supports the soul in all its experiences and maintains even the errant ego in its ordeals and struggles till all sorrow and suffering shall cease. It is this supreme divine who is supporting the soul. For this is the secret joy that supports the soul. The secret joy of this divine all-permeating existence is what supports the soul, not only supporting the soul in all its experiences and maintains even the errant ego that makes all the stumblings and mistakes and confusions, pain and suffering, even that little ego is supported by this divine existence, divine being, in its ordeals and struggles, till all sorrow and suffering shall cease. When the ego recognizes the soul's calling and gradually learns to surrender and dismantle itself and dissolve itself into the infinity of being, infinity of consciousness, infinity of love and delight, that's when all the sorrow ends, suffering ceases. His is the love and bliss of the infinite divine lover. His is the love and the bliss of the infinite divine lover, who is drawing all things by their own path towards his happy oneness. What a beautiful picture. All beings in their own limited, narrow ways are ultimately moving towards this divine beloved behind all things, in whom all exist and move and meet each other and melt and merge into that universal one being. He is the love and the bliss of the infinite divine lover, who is drawing all things by their own path. So this divine being is gently drawing, nudging each and every creature according to their own path, according to their own inclination, according to their own possibility, towards his happy oneness. On him, the will can unalterably fix. On him, the will can unalterably fix. Our will has to fix unwaveringly, unchangingly upon this integral conception of this Supreme Being as the invisible power that guides and fulfills it, and as the source of its strength. Our little will, from where does it gain its strength? It comes from that infinite source. Once we recognize it, once the will recognizes this and fix upon him unchangingly, unalterably, as the invisible power that guides and fulfills it, the will itself is fulfilled and guided by that greater will, and as the source of its strength. Our tiny little will gains its strength from that infinite will. It is guiding, it is leading towards it. So once we recognize it, we can relax into the guiding force of that great wisdom and its power. In the impersonality, this actuating power is a self-illumined force that contains all results and calmly works until it accomplishes. In the personality, an all-wise and omnipotent master of yoga, whom nothing can prevent from leading to its goal. So it is operating through the impersonal aspect as well as the personal. So in the impersonality, this actuating power is a self-illumined force, self-illumined. It is illumined from within force that contains the result. So this force that is propelling contains the results and calmly works until it accomplishes. It is calmly working. It is not a restless action, but a calm, vast action to which we can surrender to. And it contains all the results. It is propelling from its vastness, and it enters into our thought, into our speech, into our action. That's why it is important to recognize when the divine will is moving your thoughts, your speech, your action. Not our own tiny little will and its struggling ego. When we surrender to that great, vast will, even in its impersonality, it is actuating power. And it is a self-illumined force that contains all results. In the personality, an all-wise and omnipotent master of yoga. So we begin to recognize, if we approach through the dimension of the personality, then we recognize the master of yoga, who is omnipotent, whom nothing can prevent from leading it to its goal. So it is so omnipotent, nothing can stand against it. When there is that divine power and its grace that is supporting us, no obstacle will stand on the way. You will reach the destination, because it is that which has chosen you, seeing your possibility. It is not our limited, narrow conceptions of ourselves or the divine that is going to limit. It is the soul's calling. When we listen to it and when we consecrate, the rest will work itself out. This is the faith with which the seeker has to begin his seeking and endeavor. This is the type of faith we need to start this journey. That integral conception of the divine, that idea upon which we need to really fix our thought, our will, our emotion. This is the faith with which the seeker has to begin in his seeking and endeavor. For in all his effort here, but most of all in his effort towards the unseen, mental man must perforce proceed by faith. We are always beginning with faith because our knowledge is always imperfect. But something in us knows, and that knowing is what translates itself as the faith. And a sufficient support in the mind, in the heart, is sufficient. So, this is the faith with which the seeker has to begin his seeking and endeavor. For in all his effort here, but most of all in his effort towards the unseen. See, we have to put that effort towards the unseen, the divine we have not seen, we have not met, we have not realized. Even then, it is with this faith that we proceed, and with this conception that we proceed. The mental man must perforce proceed by faith. It is by faith we start our journey. We do not know the divine. We haven't seen the divine. We have an imperfect, sketchy idea in the mind and a little feeling in the heart. But there is a awakening call of the soul to which we are consecrating. And there is a conception of the divine who is all blissful, all beloved, who is all permeating, infinite existence, consciousness, being that is behind all. So with that conception and focus, with faith, we can proceed. When the realization comes, the faith divinely fulfilled and completed will be transformed into an eternal flame of knowledge. We have seen before the flaming heart. Now here is a flame of knowledge, a radiant power that illumines. So when we realize, when we proceed with faith, we move eventually towards realization. So when the realization comes, the faith is divinely fulfilled and completed. Faith gets justified and fulfilled and completed, and will be transformed into an eternal flame of knowledge. Faith will be transformed into an eternal flame of knowledge. So that it's no more a faith that is seeking, but a realization that is fulfilled, that is fulfilling the faith, and a deep knowledge, an eternal knowledge, not a transient knowledge, knowledge that is eternal, born out of your direct experience of the contact with the divine, embrace of the divine, immersion in the divine, its power, its impulsion, its living presence. That's how the journey gets fulfilled, preparing the instrument ready for the divine action in the world. So this is the type of faith and an integral conception of the divine we require to start on the path. It really doesn't matter our intellectual conceptions. Even if we read all scriptures and all the philosophical conceptions, that is insufficient. But this, a little contact, a living touch, awakening to the soul's calling. And even if the mental conception is imperfect, that's all right. The heart is flickering, that's all right. All that will be rekindled. And however be your offerings, it will be received. And a profound intellectual development is not necessary for everyone. If it has, well and good, it will be a solid foundation for a powerful yoga. But not everyone is called upon to have a deep intellectual foundation. It is just enough to have a touching point, a sufficient support in the mind, in the heart, in the will, in the outer being. And it's turned towards the call of the soul and its consecration. With that, whatsoever be the offering, however limited, imperfect it will be received. The sacrifice will be received by the divine, because the divine is seated in you. You exist in the divine. Divine is deep within you, who knows you more than you know yourself and receives the sacrifice. So what more do we need on this journey? What a profound and beautiful and simple at the same time. In spite of all the complexity of the human nature, this conception gives us immense leverage to set ourselves on the path. So welcome to the path of integral yoga. And with this, we come to the end of this episode. Thank you for being with me, and please do share your joy, your discoveries, your insights, so that it can benefit all other seekers. Contribute to other people's growth. Through that, you yourself expand and widen. And in your attempt to articulate, you yourself will be bringing more clarity into your own understanding, your experience, your observations. So be generous with yourself, your expression. Help everyone in this journey. It's a journey that is co-created by all of us. Thank you for being with me. See you next week.